I was in a state of shock and horror. Miss McCabe, you would agree that the story that you're testifying to doesn't make sense and is borderline incriminating at times. I was in a state of shock and horror. Horror. I'll see everybody at sidebar. Hey folks, so today we got to talk about the Karen Reed murder trial. Man, I got sucked into this one. It's currently in its 8th consecutive week of the prosecution presenting their side of things. And at the helm of the prosecution is an attorney named Mr. Lally. Mr. Lally is a great attorney if you like attorneys that are barely audible and never make a good point. He's actually impressively good at both of those things, but I do think that Mr. Lally's quiet, slow, boring, never make a good point style is actually a strategy to deal with being given an extremely weak case to prosecute. This is by far the weakest murder case I've ever seen make it this far in the process. Think about being a prosecutor and you're given your case to prosecute, and not only is the physical evidence weak, we're going to talk about it, and weird, but on top of that, pretty much all of the key witnesses that are central to the case have one aspect of their testimony, a Google search, some text messages, maybe they can't remember at the important part, something that makes them a way better witness for the defense than the prosecution. And so the prosecution has been stuck in defense mode. They haven't been able to go on offense and confidently say, "Your Honor, the prosecution calls the next key witness." And then when that person's up on the stand, slowly set up a big moment, hit the big moment, and look over at the jury like, huh? Pretty good, right? Good moment, pretty convincing, pretty overwhelming that this lady over here is guilty. Slam dunker, strutting around, confidently enjoying the big convincing moment that they just hit. The prosecution hasn't been able to do any of that. They're not calling up the key witnesses to set up the slam dunk moment for the jury. They're stuck calling up the key witnesses to get out in front of some devastating aspect of their testimony to deal with it, because if, as the prosecution, if you don't call up a key witness that's central to the case because of some little part that doesn't look good, then the defense, when it's their turn, really has a field day with it. See, the prosecution knows they got nothing. They didn't call up this witness. What are they hiding? Like, for example, old Jennifer McCabe over here, you would think, in theory, this should be a good witness for the prosecution. She found the body with Karen Reed. She allegedly heard Karen Reed screaming a confession over and over again. Why wouldn't this be a great witness for the prosecution? Well, she Googled how long to die in the snow hours before anyone was supposed to know anyone was dying in the snow, or how long to die in the cold. So unless you were a part and knew that someone was dying in the snow, there was no reason to Google that at 2:27 in the morning. And so as a prosecutor, Mr. Lally, it's hard. It's really hard to deal with those moments. And so how do you do it? How do you deal with pretty much every key witness having something that is just brutal for your case as a prosecutor? Well, you get quiet, you get slow, you make everything tedious, and you put on a poker face. And when those moments happen, she Googled that? Wait, that should flush this whole case down the toilet just right there. You just pretend like it's not a big deal, and you make everything slow and boring, and then after her, maybe you call a couple pointless witnesses, go a few extra days, put some distance in between these really tough moments for the prosecution, and just pretend it's going well, and having a lack of big, convincing, overwhelming moments make up for that for just the sheer length of the case. See, our case isn't good, but it's long. I can't guarantee a good case, but I can guarantee a long case. Mr. Lally, lawyer. And I really think that is one of Mr. Lally's strategy, is just pretend it's going well, don't make any big reactions to anything, just pretend we are slowly slogging through our case, and the strength of our case is just the sheer number of witnesses. Do you see how many people we've called up there? Huh? That's something, right? Please? Okay. So let's just go through the story from the very beginning, and as moments arise in the story, I want to talk about whether it's a strength or a weakness for the prosecution's theory that Karen Reed purposely backed into and ran over, killing John O'Keefe, and then drove away, or the other theory, which is Brian Albert, the guy that was throwing the party that night, the retired law enforcement officer, 30 years in the force, extremely connected to law enforcement in that area. The other theory is that Brian Albert, the retired cop, and his nephew Colin Albert, I printed out some pictures because I think some of my audience probably hasn't been watching this one, so I'm going to try to make it as clear as possible. The other theory is these two dudes got into a fight with John O'Keefe, the guy that was killed, this guy, beat him up, either beat him to death or beat him unconscious, and he's laying there and they're going, oh no, just put him out on the yard and make it look like he was hit by a car or something. And so those are the main theories. Karen Reed, who's on trial for murder, either she did it purposely, killed her boyfriend with their SUV, or it's Brian Albert and Colin Albert got into a fight, beat him up, and left him for dead. But let's go back to the very beginning. The start of this story, I think, could be the start of a really good horror movie. John O'Keefe, the poor guy that was killed in this story, is just living his life. He's a law enforcement officer in the area, and total nightmare scenario. His sister and his brother-in-law both pass away, and they had 2 kids. He had a niece and nephew. John O'Keefe steps up and takes custody of his niece and nephew after his sister and her husband pass away, and he moves into their house, his sister and brother-in-law's old house, and now he is taking care of his niece and nephew. Well, he moves right next to how he ended up around this crazy family is just wild. So how rare and horrible is it that both parents die and someone has to take over custody and moves into their neighborhood? And he moves into right next to Jennifer McCabe. Jen McCabe looks like the type of woman that would be nice to your face, but as soon as you leave the room, her face would go hag and she'd immediately start listing all of your flaws and shortcomings. That's the vibe I get from her. But that's what feels like a horror movie to me. He moves into this really nice neighborhood. It's this whole new life. He's going to take care of his niece and nephew. All right, maybe this is going to be all right. This is going to be hard, but I got to do it. I got to step up and do it. And it's on the surface, it looked like a nice upscale neighborhood with freshly cut grass and flowers blooming. Everybody seemed like they were up for a good time. Hey, we're going to the waterfall bar. Why don't you come along? Everybody was very welcoming. Hi, I'm Jennifer McCabe. Welcome to the neighborhood. But under the surface, it turns out they were all sloppy, drunk psychopaths. No! And so he's in this neighborhood. All of a sudden, he's next to Jennifer McCabe. He becomes friends with her because now he's got these kids now and she's got kids. So it's hey, can we coordinate this? Can we coordinate that? Makes a lot of sense. And then at some point, John O'Keefe, who was killed in this story, him and the kids, his niece and nephew that he's taking care of, move to a different house. And he ends up moving right next to, now his neighbor is the brother of the guy, Brian Albert, that one of the main theories thinks that this guy killed him. And so it's like, you can't get away from this family. And if you're sitting there, you haven't been following this one, and you're going, man, this is a lot of people. I don't know if I can follow this. Just know it's basically one family. The Alberts and the McCabe's. But it really is one family, because Jennifer McCabe's sister is his wife, and this guy's nephew, right? This is his dad. That's who John O'Keefe moved in right next to after Jen McCabe. But anyway, it's basically just this one family in this area, and due to truly horrible circumstances of losing the brother, or losing his sister and her husband, he ends up just intertwined in this family, and it's a wild one. All right, so anyway, he's living in these neighborhoods. He's all intertwined with this family. He's taking care of the kids, and it gets to the fateful night in January of 2022. They're all out at the bars. They're drinking, and the investigation followed Karen Reed, the woman that's on trial for killing John O'Keefe, followed her around on the security camera footage from the bars, and she at least had 9 drinks and then drove in a snowstorm. Not smart. And so that right there, and maybe is the strongest piece of the prosecution's case, that right there, having 9 drinks, probably being blackout drunk or close, and then choosing to drive in a snowstorm, I think that's a strength for the prosecution's theory that, I mean, when people get blacked out drunk and drive, it's not that crazy to think that she hit and killed someone. So Karen Reed has 9 drinks and then is driving away from the bars. John O'Keefe, her boyfriend, but they're in a pretty ugly fight. But people have ugly fights all the time.
What the fuck went through your head when you said that?
They're in a pretty ugly fight, and it does seem like they're at the end of their relationship, just what they're texting each other and everything. And so Karen Reed drives drunk. John O'Keefe's in the passenger, drives to Brian Albert's house. He's having an after party. Everybody was at the bars, and then he's saying, all right, bars are closing, come out, I'm having people over. So Karen drives over to Brian Albert's house. The retired cop of 30 years pulls up to his house, and then this is where the theories really go in different directions. So the prosecution's theory is that they're in a fight. I hate you. Our relationship sucks. Whatever they're saying. And then John O'Keefe gets out of the SUV, walks around to the back of the SUV to just, I don't know, walk somewhere else, walk into the house. And the prosecution's theory is at that point, Karen gunned it in reverse, hitting John. The force of hitting John shatters the plastic cover of her taillight. She hits John, and then I think even they're saying he runs him over, and then killing him, and then leaves. And that she did it on purpose, and then she gets home around 12:30. And then I guess the prosecution is saying then pretended to start to get worried about him, even though she knew exactly what happened, pretended to get worried about him, and then at the crack of dawn calls her niece and says, John didn't come home last night, I'm freaking out. And then her niece calls Jen McCabe, because Jen McCabe and Karen Reed became good friends because Karen Reed started dating John O'Keefe, and John O'Keefe and Jen McCabe had been neighbors and knew each other, and John O'Keefe introduced Karen Reed to Jen McCabe, so they were friends. So then Karen Reed's niece calls Jen McCabe and said, we're worried, we can't find John. He didn't come home last night. So then they all 3 meet up. It's Karen Reed, Jen McCabe, and the niece. They meet up and to go look for John. Karen Reed immediately said, well, let's go look at the party where I dropped them off. They drive, I think it's around like about 6 in the morning. They drive back to Brian Albert's house, and they find him laying in the snow, dead, and it all goes from there. Here is where I think it really starts to be a tough case to prosecute for Mr. Lally. Is the investigation, the investigators show up, the lead investigator is Trooper Proctor, and Trooper Proctor was up on the stand 2 days ago, and he's going to get finished with cross-examination, I would assume, today. And Trooper Proctor doesn't have any credibility because immediately the investigation was this was a car-related death. It definitely wasn't anything that had to do with Brian Albert inside the Albert's house. I mean, Trooper Proctor knew the Alberts, he knew the name. I mean, it's a small community, and the Alberts are known. He was in the force for 30 years. So Trooper Proctor just went in with blinders on, and it never was anything else that Karen Reed hit him with the car, and she's a nut job and a retarded cunt with no ass. He's texting that to the other investigators and to his bosses when they're, doing all of the things you got to do to investigate a death. They're already referring to Karen as that. So she never for a second got a fair shake, an objective, like, all right, this woman's life is on the line. We need to make sure that we go in the right direction. It's not fair to this citizen to never even for 1 second get a fair shake on this whole thing. Okay, so here's where Trooper Proctor, on the stand 2 days ago, said, quote, after one full day of investigating, so think they get there, it's still snowing, they process the yard, sort of. Inside the house, Brian Albert's house, was never treated like a crime scene. So they get there after a full day of investigating and talking to people and the whole thing. Trooper Proctor said, quote, there was compelling evidence that Miss Reed struck Mr. O'Keefe with the vehicle. Compelling evidence. All right, and then he listed the compelling evidence that he thinks is there to end up saying that. And so let's go through them. He said, we know John O'Keefe didn't go into the Alberts' house. They don't know that. They just, if the lead investigator, Trooper Proctor, would have showed up and treated the Alberts and the Alberts' house like a real crime scene, that would have taken a lot of balls, right? Because people would have looked at him like, really, man? You're going to jerk around the Alberts like this? You know who he is? You're going to go in there and process their house and do come on, man. Wow, that's just really, we take care of our own on the police force. So I think it was way easier for the investigators to not have to deal with that uncomfortable social situation of, yeah, Brian, we are investigating you. Sorry, pal, it's looking really bad. There's a dead guy on your lawn. We have to investigate your house and go down in the basement and just check things out. I'm sorry, but that would have been really uncomfortable for Trooper Proctor, and so it was never even considered. And so here is the compelling evidence. We know John didn't go into the house. They don't know that, okay? They just don't. The next piece of compelling evidence that they just knew it was Karen is John was wearing one shoe was off, and anyone that's processed car accident scenes knows a lot of time when there's a car that hits a person, the shoes pop off or one shoe pops off. So the fact that one shoe was popped off, it has to be that Karen's car hit him. It has to. He's missing one shoe. But how easy is that if Brian Albert, who was a cop for 30 years, and Colin Albert accidentally beat him to death and are sitting there in the middle of the night going, oh no, how do we make it look like we didn't do this? Take a shoe off. It'll make it look like Karen hit him. All right, one shoe's off. There we go. How hard was that? Okay. Then the next piece of compelling evidence, according to Trooper Proctor, the lead investigator, is Karen's statements. And I think what he's talking about is, at least according to old McCabe, Karen was confessing, I did it, I did it. But the problem is, and this is another hard thing for the prosecution, she changed her story from her grand jury to this trial. It went from, could I have hit him? Did I hit him? To now, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And so he just, all right, you're believing Jen McCabe? That's on you. And then one of the most truly horrifying and nightmarish parts of this whole story is the first statement Karen gave to Trooper Proctor, the lead investigator. She said, Brian Albert and Colin Albert beat the shit out of him and left him for dead. She articulated, this wasn't some wacko story that the defense 2 years later came up with. She articulated it that day clearly to the lead investigator, Trooper Proctor, and Trooper Proctor left that meeting where he was talking to Karen, texting all the other investigators and his supervisor, she's a whack job. And then another investigator's like, what'd she say? And he goes, she said it was Brian Albert that beat him up. And that investigator was like, what a retard bitch. I mean, she really never got a fair shake. Imagine your boyfriend gets killed and you're saying to people, you guys, I didn't do it. And it's cops investigating cops, and everyone's just calling you a retarded cunt with no ass. And everything you're saying is just, yep, she's crazy. She's a nut job. I mean, that really is starting to get like horror movie level scary. All right. So then the next piece, according to Trooper Proctor, the next piece of compelling evidence is the taillight plastic is totally shattered from Karen's SUV, and a bunch of pieces of it are right there in the yard. So, it has to be. The taillight cover's broken in a million pieces. The million pieces are right there in the lawn. Case closed. Big moment. Slam dunkaroo for the jury. Let's all and go have some cold brewskis to celebrate. But in my opinion, the taillight, the pieces of broken taillight cover are better for the defense. That's what the prosecution thinks is one of their main, like, look, it has to be. It's the car, the taillight, it's right here. It's case closed. But that taillight cover is extremely hard plastic. And remember, John O'Keefe gets out of the SUV and walks around. How far away could he have possibly been? It's not enough space. Even if she totally floored it, the human body is too soft for the taillight cover to break the way that it breaks. Also, there's footage of Karen at her SUV after she supposedly hit and exploded her taillight, hitting John. But even if they can argue that that camera is from a different time, whatever, there's no way, in my opinion, if I'm sitting there on the jury, I'm shaking my head. Anytime they start saying, see, she hit him with the car and the taillight exploded into a million pieces. I don't even think if Karen Reed was going 50 miles an hour backwards and John O'Keefe stuck his elbow out, which I think is the hardest part of the body, stuck his elbow out and hit it square, that it even would break like that. For the taillight cover, the hard plastic that's designed not to break like that, to break like that, I think it was either hit with like a hammer or something to try to strengthen a weak case. Like, look, now everything works, ta-da. Or it was broken from Karen backing into something else. Maybe she backed into the snowplow. It looks like she backed into John's car when she gets back to her place at one point. You know, she was driving blackout drunk. So you do tend to hit things and bump things, but again, I don't think the taillight is a slam dunker by any means for the prosecution. I think that I'm getting a call. I'm just going to let it go. I think that makes the whole thing look even more like a setup, like they're trying to just shove this murder case down everyone's throat. And I truly think if So the theory is that Karen did it, and the other theory is that the retired cop, totally connected to the law enforcement community in that area, they just had to, they were forced to just go with Karen, because to go with the other theory is really something big. And if it wasn't, though, if the other theory wasn't a cop that was totally connected, I feel like this case would have been dropped, or it would have gone in a different direction. But the investigators did not and refused to look into the Alberts. Brian Albert's wife, so the guy that they think maybe like beat him up, his wife even talked about, once the lead investigator, Trooper Proctor, takes care of all this for us and it's over, I think a gift is in order, and it doesn't pass it does not pass really any test. The prosecution's case doesn't pass, in my opinion. And so here we are. Trooper Proctor has no credibility. I mean, you can't refer to the citizen. Her life is on the line. If she gets found guilty for this, she's going to go to prison forever. And the fact that he never gave her a fair shot and was calling her a whack job with no ass and making fun of her for her health problems, it just shows. From the first second of the investigation, it was Karen. She's a whack job. She's a cunt. We're going that direction. And you can't have, when there's a case, okay, I can't get to the point where I can, in my mind, think that Karen Reed hit him with the car. It just doesn't add up. But let's just say that it did. I still think that once a case, there's an invisible line of corruption and credibility. And if the lead investigators have no credibility and the physical evidence is incredibly weak and all of the key witnesses seem to be in on something and hiding something and have one part of their testimony that doesn't add up and they all have no credibility, even it gets to the point where if a line of corruption and funny business is crossed, even if the person did it, they can't be, this can't be the case that sends someone to prison for the rest of their life. These witnesses can't be the people, the Alberts and the McCabe's, these can't be the witnesses that say, yeah, she did it, and a person goes away for the rest of their life. It just can't be. And then what? The Alberts and the McCabe's go to the Waterfall Bar and I'll cheers some cold brewskis. Glad that's over. See you later, Karen. It's probably a few weeks still until the jury has this in their hands for deliberation, and already it's an intense feeling thinking, this can't be the case that puts someone away for life. That can't be the lead investigator that puts someone away for the rest of their life. This can't be the evidence that puts someone away for the rest of their life. And it's going to be interesting. I'm going to cut it off there. I love you all. See you next time. Why? Stiven Y. Shamita.